Hi, everybody. Welcome to the third biennial New York City Food Waste Fair. I'm joined here by Chef Yadi, and we're excited to present our workshop and following Q&A. So I want to first drop a couple of reminders. So for one thing, feel free to use that chat, drop your burrow. Use the Q&A box. So after the video, you can ask any question you want about the recipes and all that fun, good stuff. So definitely use that Q&A box. And don't forget to check out the foodwastefair.com website to look at the other events that are coming up in for the rest of this week. And we also have the Food Waste Toolkit. You can check out that website at foodwastetoolkit.com. It's a resource for New York City businesses and residents to use to figure out how to reduce their food waste. And so those are the reminders that I have so far. And so without further ado, I would love to introduce our chef. And why don't you take it away? You can give us a little intro into who you are and what we're about to watch.
Hi, everybody. I'm so excited and honored to digitally be here, literally from my kitchen with some of my herbs, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I am really honored to partner with the Sanitation Foundation this year to host this zero waste cooking workshop. I am a trained natural food chef, educator, and community activist, or community foodtivist, as I like to say, working at the intersection of food justice, food equity, and empowerment with New Yorkers. And how do we reclaim our health, wealth, and health equity by using ancestral forms of cooking and honoring using all parts of the food. And I'm really excited to be part of this workshop and part of the fair this year, because my background of cooking is really what I call the people chef. I cook in community gardens, urban farms, schools, and really communal spaces. So this issue of food waste and zero waste is really close to my heart, because it is really something that we can all do on the ground, something that we can do in our own kitchens, and also at a communal level to impact not just climate change, but also to impact food equity and food insecurity. Woo! All right, I'm gonna save some of it for the Q&A, because we have a really yummy video for you guys, because it's not just about like the stats and the facts, it's about knowing delicious ways how to take action. And so that's exactly what we've done in our video. We made a little clean out the fridge frittata, and we shared some tips and tricks to cut down on zero waste and maximize the food in your kitchens. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the video while you're watching, or after. We'll do a Q&A, and we can always stay connected through social media or email. So thank you to the Sanitation Foundation for hosting us.
Hi, I'm Chef Yadi from Happy Healthy Latina. I'm a certified natural food chef, community nutrition educator, and food activist. I'm super excited to be partnering today with the Sanitation Foundation for this year's Food Waste Fair. That means we're tackling zero waste cooking and maximizing the use of all the foods in our kitchen and home. Now, you might not think that you're affected.
Sorry, everybody. I'm going to try to reshare that again.
Hi, I'm Chef Yadi from Happy Healthy Latina. I'm a certified natural food chef, community nutrition educator, and food activist. I'm super excited to be partnering today with the Sanitation Foundation for this year's Food Waste Fair. That means we're tackling zero waste cooking and maximizing the use of all the foods in our kitchen and home. Now, you might not think that you're affected by food waste, but the truth is that all New York City apartments and residents are. 54% of our food waste comes from New York City residents. That means that over 68% of all the food that we're throwing out right now is edible. That's about 8.4 pounds of food a week. So we're not just talking about health wealth here, we're also talking about direct money in our pockets. So today we're going to talk about some simple tips and tricks, because when you learn how to save your food, how to cook it, and how to work with it, you can really maximize it without throwing it out. One of my favorite things to do is blend sauces and clean out my fridge and get creative with dishes. I love to do sauces because it's a great way to blend herbs, vegetables, spices, and then also use oil and vinegar as a preservation method. Knowing how to store food is one of the maximum ways that we can prolong its life. For example, for herbs, here I have an old spaghetti jar that I used and I cleaned it out because it's glass. And herbs love to be treated just like flowers, which means with water and in a jar, they last for a really long time. You can store your herbs on the kitchen top counter or in the fridge. Sometimes I like to put a little bag over it. Today, we're blending up one of my favorite Caribbean sauces, which is sofrito. Sofrito is a Caribbean base that we use for soups, sauces, stews, and marinades. But you could also make other great sauces like pestos or peas stews. A pea stew is without the nuts. You could do a chimichurri. You could do like a green goddess salad dressing. And today we're going to be using some cilantro and some culantro, some wide leaf cilantro. And we're going to go ahead and use, not the rubber band, make sure you don't use any rubber bands. We're going to use all parts of the food. So not only are we going to use the leaf, but we're also going to use the stalk. So for our sofrito, we want to go ahead and put all parts of it right into our blender. And I love to use something that we do in the restaurant world as well at home, which is called FIFO, first in and first out, which is the first thing that goes into your fridge is the first thing that comes out to use. So if you have more than one item, I like to meal prep and plan so that I don't overbuy. But if you do have more than one item, you want to be able to use the one that you bought first. So after we grab whatever herbs we have in our fridge, we're also going to go ahead and put in some garlic. Now, as I'm cutting up my food, I'm going to see that there's pieces that are left over, like the skins of my garlic or the tops of my peppers, but I can get more use out of that as well. Don't just trash it, let's maximize its benefits. Two different things that we can do with our food scraps is we could compost it, like our friends at Full Circle have this beautiful compost bin here, which compost means that we're just helping materials to break down more so that they can go back into the earth to help us grow more food. You can then take your compost to your local farmer's market or a compost drop-off site that you can look up where there are some in your city or in your neighborhood. Or as a chef and cook, I love getting more flavor out of the skins and scraps of my food, and I like to save them in a bowl or in a bag, and then I boil them down to make veggie broth, because veggie broth is for sure not free. You could also use the same thing with animal bones and make things like chicken stock or beef stock or bone broth. It really reminds me of the way that my grandmother and great-grandmother used to cook, which is to preserve food naturally using salts, oils, and vinegars, but also to use all parts of the food. So we're gonna go ahead and use our tomatoes, and also knowing how to store our items. So things like tomatoes, garlic, and onions don't need to be stored inside of the fridge because the moisture can affect them and can affect the freshness. But sometimes you have those tomatoes in the fridge that are feeling a little soft, but you can still use them. Those are perfect for soups and for sauces and stews. A lot of times we can get confused by food because of the sell by, the use by, or the best by date. And now remember, those are just indicators. So a sell by is really so the seller knows by when they should sell or pull those from the shelves. But best by or use by are really more indicators of freshness. But you are the chef and you are the judge. So make sure to look at your food, smell your food, and be the ultimate judge. If it still looks good and still smells good, it can probably still be used. So I'm going ahead and I'm saving those scraps so that I can build that flavorful broth. And I'm using elements that are gonna bring a lot of flavor. Also knowing how to cut the food so that you can maximize using all of it. So when I'm using a pepper for a sauce, I go around the top, the circumference of the pepper, so that I'm wasting as little of the pepper as possible. And I just pull out my seed just like that. So I'm gonna save that. And then my pepper tops are also gonna go in, and half of my pepper. So I like to save the glass jars and plastic jars in my kitchen to repurpose for saving my sauces as well. And now we're gonna go ahead with some citrus. This is a sour orange, and this is a lemon. Remember, when you're cooking, I love to emphasize that your citrus, not only can you use the inside, but you can also use the outside. This has an essential oil in it, and the skin has lots and lots of flavor. So not only are we going to squeeze this, but when we wrap around and we make our frittata, we're also going to use the zest for more flavor. Using zest, using fresh herbs, and using a good finishing oil will give your leftovers an entire new life of flavor. Many times we throw out our leftovers because we feel a little fatigued from them, or we feel like they're lacking a little flavor, but all they need is a little remix. So we're putting our citrus in here, and I also think about it would be really hard for me to eat all of this if I was trying to rescue it or save it. But when I blend it, I'm using some Caribbean sweet peppers. It's easy to get a lot of use out of it. Look at all of these beautiful colors, and we're really eating the rainbow. So now that we have whatever herbs and vegetables are about to go bad in our fridge, we're gonna use a preservation method, which is by putting some salt in it. Salt and vinegar are ways by pickling and fermenting that our ancestors saved foods. So a lot of times too, when we buy things that are in season, like tomatoes are about to come up in season, it's really great to buy in abundance, and then you can can or jar them. Then later in the year, you won't need to buy any tomato sauce. So really extending the life of food. Now I'm putting a little bit of olive oil inside that will help us to blend, and really finding ways to be versatile with the foods that we use. Put some pepper. A little turmeric, and we're ready to blend. Okay. All right, let's do it. So all of those vegetables broke down into this beautiful sauce that we can use to naturally season our foods. And something that I love to do to further preserve is I like to put it inside of an ice cube tray. So you have little flavor bombs in the future. So it's a natural and preservative-free seasoning. So I'm gonna go ahead and fill that up. And then we're gonna use some of this, and we're gonna do a clean out the fridge frittata. So now it's time to make our clean out the fridge frittata, which is one of my favorite end of the week meals to do for my family. I like to look around my fridge and assess what's left over and throw it in the pan for something that we can all enjoy for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Now, items you might find in my fridge are sweet plantains or black beans, and we have our sofrito that we just blended. So we're gonna go ahead and put that all together into a frittata, but you can use whatever you have in your fridge. Asparagus, broccoli, squash, jalapenos, olives, you name it, you can probably use it in a frittata. What I want you to do is really think about meal planning during your week. So think about what you might want to eat and plan to buy for that. But if you do have leftover food, blend it like we did with our sofrito, ferment it or pickle it and make it into a sauce, or figure out a way to jazz up your leftovers. So we'll put a little bit of oil in our pan and get it nice and hot. And then we're gonna use a little bit of our blended sofrito, our leftover herbs. And we wanna go ahead and let that saute. Get this nice and high. And what we're doing by putting our herbs and vegetables into a little bit of oil, it's called blooming. So it's actually a culinary term that opens up and brightens up our flavors. So it's going to take our leftovers and going to infuse it with even more flavor. We're gonna smoke paprika. I like a little bit of a smoky taste inside of my frittatas. And a frittata also moves really fast, which is what I really like. And very easy to do and put together. Take our black beans. And our sweet plantain. And if you were in here, you could already smell the garlic, the onions, the herbs, the oils, the spices, all dancing together and making those beans and plantains something new and different than what they were before. We've also reserved a little bit of our peppers. Peppers and onions and garlic are things that I see that we often have left over in our homes and fridges, and big, big flavor boosters. So we don't ever want to let those go bad. As you can see, we have a variety of beautiful colors here. So not only are we rescuing food, but we're eating the rainbow. Put a little bit of salt and pepper, and learn to trust yourself with food. Learn to really not just look at the label or read the label, but learn to look at food in its different states so you yourself know when food is fresh or maybe past its use-by date. So once we have our beans and our plantains and our peppers sauteed, we're gonna go ahead and add our eggs. So we've beaten and we've whisked 8 eggs together here. You can scale it to the size of your family. And eggs is one of those other items that is really good for a long time past the date on the, that's on the case. So we're gonna cover that with egg. And then we're gonna add some dairy, which is some shredded cheese. And cheese should be kept in the middle or the bottom of your fridge for freshness. And then we're gonna top it off with a little bit of spinach. Now, your greens don't need to be washed before you put them into the fridge. And I also like to save them by putting a little paper towel on top. When I put it into like a plastic, transfer it from plastic into like a glass case, I put a little bit of paper towel on top because that helps to absorb the moisture of the greens and helps them to last for longer. So we're gonna take this beautiful, colorful frittata that has protein, fiber, carbs in it, vegetables, it has all of it. And we're gonna put this in the oven for 5 minutes and it's gonna be set and ready to eat. So now our beautiful frittata is out of the oven. We hit that on broil for a couple of minutes and we're gonna do a couple just finishing tricks to this to elevate our leftovers. So not only have we turned it into a completely new dish that was easy to make, but now we're going to garnish it. So we're gonna hit it with a drizzle of oil, a good quality oil like an olive oil or like an avocado oil, really brings out great flavor. We're gonna put some fresh herbs on top. So again, a great way to use up any herbs that you have. You can also use dried herbs, or I grow my herbs on my window in repurposed plastic. So I only really have to cut off whatever I need at the time. Then we're gonna put a little lemon zest in it. We talked about how we can also use the outside of our lemon. It has essential oils and it has a lot of flavor. So it has really that lemon flavor is locked into that skin. So instead of having to squeeze it, the zest is gonna give us the essential oil and a lot of flavor. And then we're gonna kill it with some fresh cracked pepper. So a good oil, a citrus zest, and a dried or fresh herb will take your dish and your leftovers a really long way. That looks really delicious. Cut into our frittata right there. This lovely, lovely, lovely bite. Here. So good. No, really guys, so good. I remember to say this. Sabroso. We hope you had a good time with us today and that you feel inspired and informed and educated to get into your own kitchen and start making your own zero waste and no waste cooking meals. Make sure to join us for the festival and follow the Sanitation Foundation on Instagram, on social media, and on their website to get more information on happenings around the city and how you can contribute in your city towards a zero waste lifestyle.
All right. That looked so delicious. I was so jealous. I couldn't be there to smell and taste it for myself, but it looked so good. All right, I'm seeing a few questions come in, but let's kick this off. So let me see. As a chef and a home cook, why is food waste important to you?
Okay, so I'm super passionate about this because I had mentioned I work in nutrition education with children, but really also in communities that are suffering from what I call food apartheid or food insecurity. And food insecurity is just when you don't know where your next meal is going to come from. And about 13% of New Yorkers are food insecure, and we're disproportionately affected in communities of color. But then on the other side of that, about 250 tons of food a year are wasted in New York alone. And so it's just such a big disparity to like, there's so much food waste, and it just makes me feel very passionate about empowering people in their own homes and how to use all of their food, and then working at a communal level, whether that's with policymakers or just with organizations, and how do we create infrastructure around rescuing food, right? Because so much of that food comes not just from homes, but from restaurants, colleges, hospitals, and all of this food I'm talking about is edible food. So when we're talking about upcycling from our fridge, it also really comes to mind, how can we upcycle the food that is going into landfills and feed it to community members?
For sure. Thanks for sharing that. Can you, I mean, this next question rings really true to me, especially as a daughter of immigrants, restaurant owners who thought about food all the time and maximized, you know, every food scrap they had. Can you talk a little bit more about how food waste is connected to your culture and heritage?
Well, obviously we're from different cultures, but just what you're saying right there, just like I love talking about food and working with food, because food stories and food pathways unite us more than they will ever divide us. And like what you're saying right there, my parents didn't own restaurants, but like you could not throw anything out in my house. And I grew up in a generation with my great grandmother, my grandmother, and my mom, and everything was getting used. So you had to, there was no such thing as food waste. And there was also working with really tough parts, or maybe undesirable parts of food, right? But that was like the gold, like the oxtail, or like the chicken bone, or the chicken neck, or things that are really trendy now. Like when I talk about like bone broth, or like, right, I'm like, my great grandma she was doing that. She was boiling down the bones, she was making the broth, right? We were preserving. When we talk about like kombucha, we have like curtido in like Latin America, where we preserved cabbage, which is kind of like kimchi. So, right, there was always like the stinky cabbage in our fridge. Nothing was going to waste. You find ways, which is, as a cook and a chef, I've really found that translates to also like techniques. They were using a lot of different techniques, like whether we're talking about preserving or pickling, or whether we're talking about using a pressure cooker to like break down tough parts of meat, or like stewing or braising. So they were honoring the whole food, but also matching it with like an appropriate technique. And I think it's so important to pass down that tradition and those stories.
Totally. And I think one of the coolest parts about those types of food waste prevention or preservation techniques is that there are so many similarities between different cultures, like kimchi and sauerkraut, and there's just so much to learn, and just so many like new flavors to try that are super delicious, and it's super fun to experiment with them all. So do you have some favorite low waste meals besides a frittata?
So, okay, so I think frittatas and like quiches are great to like throw things in and like just get rid of them in a very loving and elevated way. And then I also think about traditional Caribbean cooking methods. We're all about like soups and stews and like stocks. And I think like cooking things down and extracting the flavors like out of bones, also making like, we have something called in the Caribbean are called locrios, which would be kind of like a pilaf, right? So like a rice dish is also a really great way to tuck in a bunch of things, whether a protein you have left over, or veggies, or fresh herbs. So yeah, I think rice dishes, bakes and roasts, soups and stews, and what I like to call it, like baking is a science, y'all. We know that, right? But cooking can be super forgiving. So when I talk about trusting yourself in the video, we also don't always need a recipe. Like a little bit of alchemy. Throw some oil, some garlic, some onion in a pot, and start throwing what you got in and see what feels good. Sometimes for me, it's coconut milk. Sometimes it's vegetable broth, right? Like cook for how you're feeling.
I think that's great. I'm thinking of like fried rice in particular. You know, when I have leftover rice and like all this other protein or veggies, I just throw it all in there.
Yes, and a fried egg
idea.
on top always makes like everything really fancy and great.
Totally. So do you have any tips for beginner cooks or beginner zero wasters when people are thinking about cooking, besides, you know, kind of just improvising?
Okay, so I talked a bunch about honoring cooking techniques, right? So like thinking about when you have an ingredient, am I going to stew this? Am I going to braise it? Am I going to bake it? Am I going to roast it? Right. So match it to a technique first. Then also, look, I brought my friends that I talked about in the videos, my herbs, right? So I do these with my high school students and like middle school students. We repurpose these. So now these are actual scallions that I bought at a supermarket, right? So I've been, Lord knows, regrowing these all summer. I just snip the top, and what do I keep getting? More scallions, right? So it's like, I paid like $2 for this bunch, and it's been giving all summer. And then I grow my own fresh herb from seed. This is a basil. But when I need it, right, a lot of times I see herb waste and herb death in fridges. You buy this big, beautiful bunch of herbs. You feel very inspired. The end of the week comes by, and what happened? So I can just snip what I need from here. And when I'm snipping, I'm encouraging more herb growth. So it's like a cycle, right? I'm being good to myself, to the environment, mimicking nature. So I think growing your own herbs is really inspirational. You can't kill mint. Mint is unruly, so start with mint. Great for tea, great for garnishes. And I think go to your farmer's market, get inspired, like go to your local farmer's market. Not only can you drop off your compost there if you're saving compost, but it's a really great place to get inspired and informed. Like taste a strawberry now when it's at its peak of its season, right? Not like a January strawberry. Taste a tomato in June when it's like in July when it's like the tomatoiest tomato, and it's a great time to make pasta sauce for the whole year, right? Can your tomatoes or preserve your strawberries and make jam. Make it fun and make that an activity, and like with your children or with your spouses. I'm literally dropping all the bombs right now because in all those seeds, you don't have to do everything, right? Do one thing that speaks to you and like keep building sustainably. Now where I'm at in my food journey, I do all those things, but like it started with just small steps in your home.
Those are such great tips. I mean, I think I never even liked a tomato until I went to a farmer's market. Like it makes all the difference.
Right?
And I mean, you mentioned working with high schoolers. I would love to hear a little bit more about the other work you've done around food, sustainability, and health.
So I think it's really important. We don't become concerned about food, I think, until we're impacted by it in some way, whether we don't have access to it, whether we're thinking about our next meal, whether we want to know where it comes from. But the point is, like, I think it's really important to inspire and inform youth, right? When we talk about planting the seeds, and we want to grow these adults that are like really active in their communities and have all these healthy habits like the ones we're talking about today. But like, where does that begin? I just can't remember learning about that in school or in any specific place. So my impetus with food as a chef, people always say, what restaurant do you cook for? And that's why I always say I cook for my people. I think it was really important to move back into my community with the cooking knowledge, the techniques and the tips, and also with the ancestral stories that I grew up with and techniques. My great-grandmother was 99 years old when she passed away. So I just thought about all that health wealth. So I started creating programs that were culturally relevant to kind of rescue those gastronomical stories and empower people with the tools to grow their own food. And these are really viable workforce pathways also. These are like trades, and we should want to create green spaces in our city because they affect our community and the way they look and the way that we feel. So it's really my honor and my pleasure to create, I call it CAT. So it's Culinary Arts and Agricultural Technology. And we do all the way from kindergartners to our high school students. They get food handlers licenses and also learn how to grow food, and then kind of go back into their community with this joy and spread it. I think you have to see it to be it. And since I'm only one person, like I said, I'm trying to plant all these little seeds in my community.
I think that's so inspiring. I mean, I think one of the panelists from earlier today, it was like a restaurant panel. And one of the things they mentioned was how food education should start with our youth. It really should it should be something that we learn in schools. So I take that to heart, and I believe in that wholeheartedly.
Yes, it inspires a lot of joy. And also not just when you come up across a health disparity when you're older, like I have high blood pressure, I have diabetes. love a lot of what I see in my community as well. So I'm not a doctor, but teaching people how to cook food and get kind of closer to cooking it in a healthful way, but in a joyful way, is something that I can do where I see tangible change.
Totally. All right, well, let me start looking at some of these questions that are coming in from the audience. So the first question is, can you make veggie broth with any veggie? Is there anything that shouldn't be included in broth because it won't make it taste good?
Yeah, you shouldn't really use like too many root vegetable scraps. Like try to balance that. Like for example, I eat a lot of Caribbean root vegetables. So like yuca, cassava, right? You don't want to boil yuca skin because there's an element of that that's poisonous. So you can always look up, if you haven't worked with the food before, look it up. But in general, I found that none of us really have anything too crazy in our fridges. So all the things that we normally work with, garlic, peppers, onions, think about those, the aromatics, right? Like herbs, zucchini, even some sweet potato skins, they all generally add a lot of flavor to them. And if you've ever just taken a look at the back of a vegetable broth box in the supermarket, you'll probably never buy one again because you'll just be like, oh, wow, this is a lot of salt and substitute things where you have a lot of those things on hand. So I'm kind of just always making it and experiment with different broths. And also tone down the spice. If you've eaten a lot of spicy things, I wouldn't say throw a lot of habaneros in there or jalapenos. Separate those out. I also had a question that I had answered, and someone said, "Is there anything else you can do with like avocados, mushy avocados that's not guac?" And I said, not guac, but guasacaca, which is a Venezuelan avocado salsa. So I'll drop a link for that.
Oh yeah, I'd love that recipe. That sounds delicious.
Yeah. So that's a good one. What else did someone ask?
So, I mean, this is related to the veggie stock question, but how do you decide what to reuse for another dish or to compost?
So for me, because I'm always thinking about how to use all my food. Some people cook and they take their scraps and they go right to the compost bin. Again, I'm my mother's child and my grandmother and my great grandmother's child, and I look at that thing and I'm like, is there any? It's a conscious choice each time, right? With the time that I have, so every week there's a different yadi, right? So also be forgiving with yourself where you are. If I really don't have time, it'll go to the compost bin, but I'm usually always keeping a freezer bag for that veggie broth because I'm never not going to use it or want to make soups in the future. But yeah, think about first if it can go into another meal like a frittata, like like an actual meal. Then if not, can it go into a sauce or a stock? Then if not, can it go into my compost bin? So I kind of think of the levels of the use I can get out of it.
Totally. And so how do you reduce waste in the kitchen in other ways? Maybe it's through packaging. You talked about regrowing herbs in plastic, et cetera.
Yeah, regrowing herbs in plastic. Look, we're all buying some packaged things. So like I talked about in the video, I clean out my like spaghetti jars and salt and things, and I repurpose them to put soups in them or more sofrito. Yeah, it's just like you just have to think about what's organic to you, because like there's no perfection, right? Like it's about like your kitchen and your lifestyle and what works for you. So for me, it's a lot of freezing of stuff, of sauces and stuff. I love keeping ice cube trays that are just for like sauces that I can freeze. Keeping a bag in my freezer for my veggie broth, saving any jars that do come in my house, or seeing if I can grow herbs in them. Yeah, in Caribbean household, you would open like a butter jar and you would find a seasoning inside of it, because like, so again, that's like just something I grew up with. It's like trendy now or things like that. But I'm like, yeah, we're really using everything up.
Totally. And then going off of your mention of sofrito, somebody asked, how do you use the frozen sauce cubes? Do you let them thaw and then cool? Like, how do you start using them to cook?
So even if you go to like your supermarket, you can now find like things like ginger and garlic that are frozen. So again, we're just freezing it. We're using it as a preservation, as a natural preservation method. When I want to use it, I just pop, I'm going to be like very emerald right now, like bam, I just like pop a flavor cube out into a little bit of oil, and it starts to kind of within a minute dissolve. And that's that act of blooming that I talked about. When you put any spice into a fat, it creates flavor. So a lot of home cooks, they put the ingredients in and then they put the seasonings on top. You want to put the fat in first, so that's your butter, your oil, and then you want to put the seasonings in. So the sofrito, you could do the same thing with garlic. So I often blend a lot of garlic and like olive oil, and I freeze that up too. And you can make mojo with it, or you could just have a nice little garlic bomb. So it doesn't have to be sofrito. You could freeze pesto. It can be your favorite like kind of marinade.
That's such a good kitchen tidbit. What are your go-to ingredients in the kitchen?
My go-to ingredients, I always have to have like acid on hand. So like lemon, oranges, grapefruits, limes, vinegar. Those are great, like fruit vinegar, like apple cider vinegar, balsamic. Those are great flavoring agents. So I also often inventory my spices. We've all got like that's garlic powder that's all caked up, that's been there for like 2 years, and you're tapping on the bottom and still using it. Well, listen, spice is a big flavoring agent and it matters. And a lot of times you may be putting a lot more salt or other things on your food just because your spices aren't fresh. So I'm often checking when we're talking about best by, used by, the dates on my spices, rotating them if they've been there too long, using fresh herbs. Yeah, so good acid, good fat, so good oil, fresh herbs, and good spices. They can rescue anything.
Yeah, that sounds so good. Somebody did ask about the mojo recipe you mentioned and whether or not they could get it.
Yeah, you know what? Why don't I send that to you guys, and you can put it up, because I sent 2 recipes, and you guys can put it up as part of the recipes, because it's another one that's you've always got kind of like garlic, lemon, and like oil on hand. You preserve it. Really delicious, especially grilling season.
What do you think is the best way to get people, especially adults who didn't grow up with this knowledge, to change their behavior around food waste?
I think that the best way is through joy. Okay, so let me just say this. So again, you have to find, so remember all these different seeds that I'm talking about. I think it's each one teach one. So there are practices that I learned from my mother and grandmother, but then I've built on that knowledge and I've kind of brought that back into the home. And I think it's very important that people see it. So again, I'll just like go into the kitchen with my mom and make a sofrito and say, hey, like we've always grown up making sofrito, but now we don't throw out these scraps. We're gonna put that in the freezer, and make vegetable broth with it. And my mom was like, oh, okay, right? But like now she does it on her own, right? Taking a niece or nephew to a farmer's market. So I try to find moments of creating like exposition and a memory, but like a joyful thing, because I have personally found that people feel more empowered and more open to come to me with questions about wherever they are in their food journey. Wherever you are in your food journey, that is a perfect place to start. So like if you're the person that has the compost bin and the scrap bag and the ice cube trays, great. If not, maybe we're going to pick one thing that we're going to do. And then we're going to share that one thing. Like I just heard from this quirky girl today about putting your sofrito in an ice cube tray, or like maybe we're going to, share one piece of knowledge. And I just find that when you approach it in that way, the information, I've been doing this now for, I think this is going to be my 5th year. And I'm deeply humbled by the amount of people that I've been able to talk to or work with. At this point, I've worked with thousands of New Yorkers and students and residents. And it's just one day at a time, though, just like showing up here today and talking about this with joy in my heart.
Yeah, I think we're actually coming up on time. But I wanted to leave people off with the question, how can people learn more about and uh, be able to support your work?
Okay, so I'm gonna send a thing to please stay connected. You can stay connected on social media through Happy Healthy Latina. You can also send me an email, happyhealthylatina@gmail. This replay will be available. Um, and on social media, or if you email me, you can get on my newsletter. You can just be abreast of like different projects that I have going on in the community. I have a micro series coming up with Food Network that's going to be featuring my work in the community. I'm coming up in the fall, and just some other fun projects. So I always love staying in touch, and just seeing food pictures. Like, you can definitely just send me pictures of your food. I love to see it.
Thank you so much for creating this workshop, answering all these questions. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you, your work, and how you're thinking about food and food waste.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I totally forgot it was like almost 7 o'clock at night. Like, I get so into it. Please stay connected, stay inspired, stay informed, and just thank you so much to the Sanitation Foundation for doing this amazing work and creating these spaces where we can dialogue and really talk about it, which is really what we need, right? To be informed and connected.
Totally. Well, thanks. Thank you. And thank you everyone for coming.
Bye.